Hello and welcome everyone to the next AMA session, which has been organized as part of the Rise Up session. Today we have with us Mr. Phalgun Kompalli, who is the co-founder of upGrad. upGrad has been one of those premier organizations which has gone ahead and changed the way that the edtech sector in the country itself works, situating itself in a very unique marketplace where most players were in the K8 or K12 section. upGrad has been looking at revolutionizing higher education in the country and taking it to all parts of the country as part of the National Startup Awards, which goes ahead and tries to recognize startups which are not only building incredible products but also going ahead and having considerable social impact. We are very glad today to have Mr. Falgun with us. Before I start the session, I would like to remind everybody that any questions you have that you would want us to ask Mr. Falgun, you can leave it to us in the chat, and we'll be happy to ask him that. The National Startup Awards are closing their applications tomorrow at midnight, so all budding at tech startups, all startups from across sectors are invited to apply for the National Startup Awards. With this, Falgun, very welcome today to the session, and it's very glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for calling me here. Pleasure to be here and share some of my experiences that I've had with upGrad over the last 7 years.
Yeah. So Falgun, one of the key things is that over the last at least 2, 3 years, we have seen that the Indian edtech ecosystem has grown up immensely. And I'm not talking just about this education ecosystem, but edtech in specific. Now, upgrad started at a stage when edtech was still nascent. You had one or two big players, a few were trying, but like the ecosystem was not being recognized as one which was robust enough to be a very independent ecosystem. So, how do you think that upgrad and its growth journey has contributed to the sector and all the players who function in it?
So, as you said, I think EdTech was relatively very small and unknown to the media 7, 8 years back when we started. And there were no big players, honestly. I think there was literally nobody to talk of in EdTech in India in 2013, 2014, right? But one of the key insights for us was that one of the key insights for us was that in a country like India, for example, poor, uh, the quality of the education that's available is very poor, and people are not able to afford it. The way to reach high levels of education penetration is only via digital, because it's almost impossible to build the physical infrastructure that is required in the amount of time to provide people that kind of access. So that's where we said that there is a really powerful value in creating a digital ecosystem for education where people have access to more affordable and high quality education. So we started with that, and we worked with multiple stakeholders, universities, governments, regulators, parents, students, to build the credibility of online education. And I think all of us together, the work that we have put in, not just upgrad, right? There are about 10, 15 big edtech companies in India today. I think all the effort that we have put in is in one, making sure that we evangelize the concept of online education, communicate to all the stakeholders that look, at online education is not inherently of lower quality as most people assume, but there are some very powerful ways to leverage technology in order to make sure that you can provide that kind of quality access to education at scale. In a country like India, where people are so distributed, there are so many different challenges. I think digital really gives us that platform where we can cater to a much larger set of audience. So, and in all of this, the contribution of upgrad, as I said, was along with others trying to evangelize the concept of online education. And COVID obviously played a big role in building the credibility for online education, because suddenly everybody realized that, okay, this is not something that's a joke and I can actually study online, because they were forced into it, right? Like, for example, work from home. 5 years back, if somebody said work from home, you would assume ki ye to chutti maar raha hai, right? But today, when you say work from home, people are like, yeah, maybe you're working from home. So it's a credible option. Similarly, online education has seen that transition with COVID, where a lot of people were forced into it and now realize the power of online learning.
It's interesting that you point this out, Falgun, because like you also have extensively worked in the education sector. Like the consulting firm that you were working with did a lot of education consulting, and you have transitioned across the sector. The thing that you said about how the way now we like view edtech as an integral part of education, how is it? Do you think that in the coming time, when we are again moving back to physical classrooms, when you will have more students moving back into physical classrooms, how do you integrate these into those institutions globally and in India on through the education landscape?
So I think moving forward, we are very clear that pure campus education, I think, is going to be a thing of the past, right? Where you do everything on campus. You can be on campus in a hostel, but you need not necessarily attend all the lectures in person, right? So I think there will be a very strong component of blended learning that will emerge over the next 3, 5, 10 years. And I think that's where we are very excited about working with some of these institutions to help them with that transition. I think there is a lot of positives and a lot of value for on-campus education, and it has a certain, as I said, aura of its own. But there is so much that we can also do in the digital world and leverage it, as I said, to deliver this at scale. That I think a combination of these two is going to be very effective. So, for example, providing access to digital content, providing access to digital doubt resolution, providing access to digital peer to peer communication and networking platforms, providing access to digital career support services, including job transitions, providing access to students from any college in the world with lectures from the best faculty globally. I think there are a lot of support services that can be provided for colleges to one, improve their quality, improve student experience, and finally improve learner outcomes in a blended environment, which is part of the stuff happening on campus and part of it happening online.
That's great because I think this idea of like the access to education that we are giving to students that upgrad is building for and other tech partners are building for, saw that there were localized centers of excellence. We knew there were specific cities you go to learn for specific courses or for specific colleges. In addition to COVID, in addition to the fact that we have now been used to a system where online education can work, do you think like edtech in itself has democratized the access to resource across regions? And the reason why I'm asking you this is because we still see that a lot of regions still are specified institutions of learning. Like you said that when you're taking a university to each student, it allows them access to opportunities they might not have had before. In that regard, do you think edtech can be the great leveler which helps the Indian education system take the next leap forward, just as say Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan did in the early 2000s?
Absolutely, 100%. I think edtech is going to be a great leveler in terms of democratizing access to high quality education because it makes it one accessible to everybody via the technology that's available, and second, it makes it much cheaper because of the kind of infrastructure that needs to be built and can be leveraged at scale. So it'll definitely be a massive democratization opportunity, and there will be look initial hiccups. Like I have been on multiple discussions on digital divide where a lot of people still don't have access to the internet, don't have access to hardware, etc. Now, I think that is a problem with any new technology that comes up. Any new technology, be it telecom, be it cars, always starts providing solutions to the top of the pyramid and then slowly starts percolating down, right? So that infrastructure needs to be built over time. Luckily in India, the data cost is extremely low as compared to some of the other geographies. Now we have to build the infrastructure for better internet, access to hardware, and I think it will happen. And once that happens, and this is a journey, right? Nobody can do this overnight, but I think that penetration and access will only improve, and eventually technology and the use of technology in education is going to be a great leveler and an opportunity to democratize access at a very large scale.
Yeah, that's great. Because when we think about who does provide educational opportunities at the end of the day, it does require a lot of different stakeholders to come in, new innovators to come in, existing innovators to pivot, which also is quite interesting because EdTech in India was understood as either a K8 section or a K12 section. And for our viewers who don't know what a K8 or K12 section is, it's basically from kindergarten to 8th grade or kindergarten to 12th grade. So this is where a lot of players were operating, whether it be in terms of offering specific doubt resolution in this age group. What was the reason that when you set out, you pivoted a bit away from this and you wanted to focus more on higher education? Was it a market gap you saw? Was it a long term vision about how education will be accessible? What were the reasons behind that?
Very honestly, I think the biggest reason was that we felt it is very difficult to build a K8 or K12 business. Obviously, we've been proven wrong. But at that point, when we started 8 years back, we thought that look, schools are always going to be the forefront, and it'll be hard for parents, because in that case, parents are the decision makers, uh, to accept another solution. And even if there is a solution, it'll only be complementary to what is happening in school, and it won't be supplementary in nature, right? So that was the thesis, and we saw a lot of companies were doing something in K12 struggle at that point. They were doing curriculum, they were doing content, they were doing toys, they were doing digital infrastructure, and we saw that all of them were having a hard time scaling because they had to go to individual schools to sell, and the leadership and the ownership of those schools would not necessarily be visionary in nature, or would not necessarily understand the purpose of this product, and they were struggling to scale. So we said that look, that's a very hard sector to work in, while higher education seems slightly easier, given here the decision maker and the person who pays is the same, and there is always a tangible career outcome. Right, in K12, with the outcomes are a little fuzzy, but in higher education, for example, the outcomes are very standard, right? Okay, at the end of this, what kind of job do you get, what kind of salary do you get, what is your increment, etc. So I think that's one of the reasons where we said that look, it's very easy to define our target audience in higher education, go to them directly, establish a strong clear outcome which is tangible, which can then be used to grow the business. So that was our logic. Obviously, there was a gap in both markets, in K12 and higher education. K12 was actually a much larger market from the number of students standpoint, but we just felt that from a learner inertia perspective, from a going to consumer directly perspective, and from the perspective of providing tangible outcomes that people can measure, higher education was more exciting.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because what you said is very true. Like K12 is one of those sections where your consumer of the product is not the customer. The customer is the parent and the consumer is actually the student. It's quite like a unique way to look at it. And which also brings me to the next question, which is like since upGrad offers high ARPU programs and typically students, professionals who now are the decisions makers for whether they want to evaluate the kind of result that they would get after an online education, what is the kind of like ROI that a student can expect?
So, I mean, we have had as I said, we do multiple things, right? We work with universities to help them with design, development, and then delivery of online programs. These could be 3 month certificates, 6 month certificates, diplomas, masters. You're probably one of the only folks who do a full online doctorate program currently. So, people have got various levels of outcomes. So, you must have read recently in the press that one of our learners has got a 1 CR CTC package recently, and that was like a threshold for us, right? It was like a watershed moment where done an online course and then got a 1 CR job. Uh, our students, multiple cases every day that we get where students have gotten a hike, uh, to the tune of 30%, 40%, to up to 500%. So there is a massive spread, but I would say that on average, students do get about 30 to 40% hike, if they're able to commit themselves to learning and then obviously apply that smartly in terms of a career transition.
Okay, that sounds quite like that. I think when we look at outcomes for education startups, that are the kind of outcomes, as you said, which are still measurable as compared to K12 outcomes, which do depend on how future outcomes will be built on it. So that's quite interesting. And that again, like now then that widens the discussion. Like we have now a lot of players in the K8 and K12 sections. We have a lot of players, as you said, who are looking through learning through toys. We have a lot of organizations which have been going ahead and also looking at social emotional learning and how that can be integrated. Now, for people who are starting up in the edtech space, right? They now we do see a lot of edtech startups coming up addressing different challenges. What are the few recommendations that you would have for them when you are entering into the space? And considering the extensive work that you have done in the space, like you would have gleaned insights from across your career. So, what are some key recommendations for startups who are starting out in the edtech space?
I mean, look, I am not an expert in all that happens in edtech. But I think a couple of things I can say is that first, it is still a very, very nascent space, right? It's not like, I don't know, automobiles or textiles or pharma or one of these things in India, right? Even those, I think in India, there's a lot of opportunity, but edtech is an extremely nascent market currently. So while there are some, let's say, some of the big players, uh, it's I think where edtech is today and where it will be 10 years from now is going to be significantly different, and it's going to be exponentially higher, right? So there's a lot of opportunity for innovative solutions to come in. And from that perspective, the only thing I would advise is that I think there needs to be focus around creation of products and services and building of value propositions that can drive very strong outcomes for learners. If you're able to do that, if you're able to build that value proposition, I think that's going to be very powerful. Instead of just being another replication or a replica of what happens and trying to like sell the same kind of product without too much differentiation, I think people are going to struggle, especially given the customer acquisition costs and the competition right now. But if you're able to come up with a truly differentiated offering, keep the consumer and the learner at the center of it, and deliver on strong outcomes, I think there is a massive opportunity for very innovative solutions to come up across K8, K12, higher ed, everywhere. Right. The second advice I would give is that in education, sometimes, or as most entrepreneurs, sometimes we tend to focus a lot on creation of the value proposition, which is basically the creation of the product, right? And not as much effort or time into communication of what that value proposition is and communication of that product, right? And I think, again, given the nascent stage of the market, it is very important to have a very smart and sharp communication strategy. Call it marketing, call it sales, call it whatever else, in order to communicate the value proposition of what you have built and how that is going to impact somebody as a learner, I think is very important to scale. So if you're able to do those two things, which is one, build a differentiated value proposition and communicate that effectively, I think edtech is an extremely nascent market right now in India, and there is massive opportunity. So it's very exciting for entrepreneurs to come into this space.
Yeah, someone who's very excited in this space and who has worked with like in the education sector before, it's great to hear from you that you do believe the space is continuing to grow. But considering that now when we are looking at the next 10-15 year overlay of how the space is going to develop, where we know that the problem or challenges in the next 5-15 years might not be digital access, that might get sorted in the next 5 years. So what are the key challenges and growth patterns that you see that upcoming startups need to adopt? And the reason why I'm asking you this is because a lot of the time, while we do discuss edtech, we are discussing it for challenges that we are solving for right now. But we
Yeah.
do realize that 10-15 years down the line, the challenges will differ. The sectors we'll be looking at differ. The idea of doing an online PhD, as you said, was something which was inconceivable 10 years ago. But because you build that product, now people are looking at how do you do specific specializations in PhDs or other master's programs also. So
Yeah.
with that overview, how what are some key growth patterns and challenges you see over the next 10-15 years for the sectors in them sector in itself?
I think the first one that I see is that today there are two worlds. One is the online world and the other is the offline world. I think moving forward there will be a much stronger overlap between the two, where you will see that a lot of the traditional universities have started to do something online, and a lot of the online companies that you see today have started to do something offline, right? So I think there is a massive leverage in building that hybrid ecosystem, and I think that's where eventually things will settle, both from an acquisition standpoint, from a learning delivery standpoint, from an outcome standpoint. So I think that's one key trend that I see playing out over the next decade. The second key trend I think playing out I see over the next decade is uh, the education will become a global market, right? Education so far has always been a very local market. Even in the US, where you see if you have an online university, most of their enrollments come from a 100-mile, 200-mile radius, even for online, right? Because universities or institutions have local credibility, local relevance, local word of mouth, because of which they grow in that region. But there is no truly global scale higher education provider. Obviously, there are some brands like Harvard and all, but they're not scale operators. So I think there is a massive opportunity for somebody to think of being a global scale operator in education, both in K-12 and for me personally exciting is in higher education, where For example, today in India, there are so many of our learners who are sitting in Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi, Darbhanga, do a master's degree from Liverpool, right? Who do a doctorate degree from San Francisco, who do a DBA from Geneva. So I think those boundaries are breaking down, where you now have access to the best in the world, sitting wherever you are. And I think that internationalization and democratization is the word you used earlier. I think is going to be a major trend, where now Indian universities are not just competing with Indian universities, and US universities are not just competing with US universities. A lot of this is going to move online slash blended. And in that sense, I think it's going to be a global market where the learner will choose from doing, let's say, an MBA from an Indian university versus a UK university versus an Australian university versus a US university, and make the choice depending on how these value propositions are built, communicated, and eventually delivered.
Okay, that's yeah. Those are two great learning, both in terms of how the like merge of both the offline and online will happen, and b how it becomes internationalized. Just specifically within how you do see education become internationalized, right? We do see that in specific countries, the focus on specific degrees is more, and you do have an imbalance there in terms of what is being studied by students. In that specific regard, do you see, say, for example, the opportunities being provided being upgrad, widening also the opportunities for the students to enter job markets? Specifically, say, for example, while you had specific streams to get into, whether it be engineering, whether it be medical sciences, or whether it be doing a bachelor's degree in history or literature to get into a journalism, do you see these degrees within themselves leading to more, I would say, generalist jobs where people go ahead and work across different sectors rather than sticking to one sector that they might have been specializing in, considering the access to education that is being provided now from different players?
I think, see, traditionally also for a lot of the folks, especially in engineering, they don't continue to do or work in areas that they study in. I'm trained as a civil engineer, for example, right? I have not done civil engineering for one day of my life. And I know a lot of people similarly who have done various things in their bachelor's, but never eventually ended up pursuing that area. Uh, so I think that is still going to be the case moving forward, because I think careers are going to become basically much more fluid. So let me ask you a question, right? Divide the total number of years of work experience for you divided by the number of jobs you've had. So what is that number?
Two.
Two, right? What would happen if I ask the same question to our parent generation?
Yeah, it
Right? That
would
number
be
would be
less.
25, 30, 40,
Yeah.
right? Because they hardly ever change jobs. They were sticking to the same career and growing in the same job. But today, people change jobs, especially younger folks, every 2, 3 years, right? Even as this goes forward, I think the trend of changing jobs and roles, because people want to pursue more exciting careers and more rewarding careers, is going to continue, because we this generation is more risk taking, is more adventurous, wants to, as I said, pursue bigger challenges, which is great. We just think that people will be shifting jobs very fast, people will be moving roles very fast, so they'll have very fluid careers. So from that standpoint, definitely yes, that what they have studied 10 years, 20 years, 30 years back will not be relevant to what they want to do today. And that's where investing in lifelong learning is going to be really important for everybody to be at the cutting edge and give them the opportunity to pursue those challenging careers.
Yeah, and I think like what you specifically said in terms of how like it gives people the opportunity. I think that's where something like edtech players like upgrad and all do make a difference, because say at 1 year down the line, if I do want to move into a job like a finance role or some other specific role for which I knew know I need to do that base learning, I think edtech players who do provide that learning without me having to relocate to another country or city and start my life basically all over in that place would be the kind of flexibility which helps me re- take over jobs and also look at different skill sets that can be built. That is a great understanding of how we do see the future going forward. And from your own experience, as you said, like you came from a different background, you then built like upgrad up with your co-founders. When a young entrepreneur is starting up a startup journey, from your specific like journey, are there any three incidents or key insights that you would want to share with them where you thought that this is where your understanding of how to build a startup changed?
First, I would say is that This is an advice I got from somebody. I didn't realize what it meant then, but now I do. I think if you're entering this space and you want to be an entrepreneur, not just edtech, anywhere you want to be an entrepreneur, I think you got to have a very long term mindset and you got to be there for the long run, right? So stay till the end. If you're thinking of it as a 2 to 3 year thing that I will experiment and my worst case is that I'll go back to a job, just fine. But I have seen that this is never going to be easy. There are always going to be challenges. There is always going to be a reason to quit and feel like, look, I'll have a better life somewhere else. Uh, but you need to be very excited about doing this for a really long time. And I believe that if you invest in that really long time in doing this, you will change, you will pivot, you will do multiple things, but eventually the outcome is going to be very, very rewarding, both from a personal standpoint in terms of what you've been able to do with your life and also from a financial standpoint. So my first advice would be in it for the long run, right, and stay the course. Because more often than not, people give up way too early because it's challenging. The second thing I would advise is that it never gets easy. You would assume that, oh, when you are day one, day two, it's harder. When you're year seven, like upgrad, you might assume that, oh, things might have gotten easier. Absolutely not. Things continue to get harder. There are a lot more challenges. There is a lot more to do. There's a lot more to deal with. If you have 4,000 employees, now you have to make sure that we are responsible for not just ourselves, but also for them. We have a million learners ensuring. So the complexity of the challenge, the scale of the challenge, uh, the constraints, the external, internal pressures always only will increase. But you need to be able to like enjoy, keep the larger picture in mind and enjoy what you're doing. And I think that's very important, and not assume that I'll come in and after 3 4 days it's going to get easy, so it's fine. I don't think it's ever going to get easy. You just need to learn to enjoy it. So that would be my second advice. The third advice would be for anybody starting up that, look, the single most, I think, the needle moving thing in terms of an outcome for your startup is your first 5 team members. So hire them very, very carefully. Be extremely, extremely selective. And I think the first 5 members that you hire and you work with to set the initial tone, culture, and multiple other things is going to go a long way in deciding the outcome of your startup.
Okay. Thank you so much, Falgun, for sharing that with our viewers. So, Falgun, just like three rapid fire questions we have for like just to understand what your personal outlook towards things are, also, just so that our viewers get to know you better. So, one thing I would want to know is like you have been doing this for 7 years now, like building a startup from scratch and setting it up. What is the one thing that you do daily, if you do it daily, that you do to motivate yourself? Is there any one specific thing that you do to motivate yourself daily?
I would not say I do it daily, but I'll tell you what motivates me, right? And this is something that I try to keep in touch with is our learner stories. So when you, as I said, hear somebody, some people mail, right? People mail saying that, look, I had to take a career break because of my pregnancy, and then I could not get back to work, and I was struggling, but I did this course, and now finally I have restarted my career, and I feel like empowered, right? That's one story that came to me recently. The other one is from a small SME shop in Jaipur. They said, look, I was selling stuff in the store, but I wanted to do something online. I did your digital marketing course. Now I have my own website. I'm running my own campaigns and I'm delivering orders to a much larger part of the country than just my store in Jaipur. And it's really empowered me. I told you the story of somebody moving from a 25 lakh salary to a 1 crore plus salary, right? So just imagine that jump and how it changes that person's life. Just a few days back, we had an online graduation ceremony for a Liverpool John Moores program with about 700 odd students. And again, you can see the joy that you're capable of bringing those people through this, right? And how you can make a difference. That being said, you can also make a difference on the other side, which is if you screw up, then you've screwed up somebody's opportunity for upward mobility, right? We internally we keep saying that, look, this is not like the Swiggy or Zomato business that, let's say you ordered dal khichdi and you got curd rice, you will complain for 2 days, but then you will forget, right? You eat what you get and it's fine, otherwise you order again. But in this particular area where students are investing 4 lakh rupees doing a master's in data science, if their experience is not great and if they don't get the kind of outcome that they want, you potentially have set that person back for life. But if you're able to do a great job there and deliver on the outcomes, you have the opportunity to positively influence somebody's life and change their life in the future, right? So I think that's something that's very empowering, that's very refreshing, and that gives us all at upgrad a lot of motivation to continue to do what we're doing.
Yeah, that must be like a great motivator for you in terms of how like just changing every day by the courses that you're running and how the outcome comes out to you. Which also like brings me to my next question, which is like for you personally, whether it be in your personal life or the way that you approach work, what for you has shifted the most, like in your shift from working in an organization to running your own organization?
So if you ask me, my previous job, I was a consultant with Partner. I think the biggest shift is ideation versus execution, right? In my previous job, I was doing a lot more ideation. I used to spend 80%, 90% time in ideation and maybe 10% time on execution. It's exact opposite here. I spend 10% of my time on ideation and about 90% on execution. So I think that's a huge mind shift in terms of the create. I mean, people think that look, there's no creativity in execution. There's immense amount of creativity in execution, right? So I think that's been my biggest shift. Second is, I think I have understood the power and the importance of building great teams. Even in the past, I was a consultant, so it was a fairly small, homogeneous team. But now here we are a very large, heterogeneous team in terms of work experience, CTC, etc., and backgrounds and motivations and aspirations of people. So, how do you work as a team which is so large and heterogeneous? I think is a huge challenge, and that's been a major learning for me again. So, those I think would be the two big things.
That's like great because I do believe that it must have been quite a seismic shift in terms of managing so many expectations, both on the employee and on also on the student end. And which also like brings me to my final question for you today, which is like, what are some of your favorite activities that you engage in to help you unwind as well as like to just basically energize you for the next day, for the next challenge? Because with the rapid expansion that upgrad has, with the many pivots it does, it has grown multifold. And as you said, like when you do that ideation, what are your favorite activities to engage in before that day and be like, okay, this has set me up for the challenge that we are gonna go ahead and take on?
Uh, I mean, outside of work, I enjoy doing a couple of things. Honestly, first is I try and play tennis twice or thrice a week, and I think that's really that's somewhere I can really totally switch off, and I think that helps me relax. It helps me like zoom out a little bit and gain perspective. But if I'm feeling too lazy to even do that, I generally go home and watch Seinfeld for I don't know 50th time or 60th. It's I think the best sitcom in the world, and that really like helps me laugh through any stress that I'm feeling in the moment. So I think those are the two things that help me take a step back and get back to work refreshed.
Yeah, that's great though. If like, but though I didn't know you were into Seinfeld, so that's a great piece of trivia though. And amongst your tennis players, is there any favorites that you like to follow?
I'm a huge Rafa Nadal fan, so
So you must have been very happy at the Australian Open, right?
he's had a great 2022 so far, and let's hope it continues.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Falgun, for being here with us and for having such like a nice conversation with us. Uh, the National Startup Awards 2021 and 2020 did have the edtech sector as a part of it. We had people from upgrad joining us as mentors. We had people from upgrad joining us as jury members, and that's what the National Startup Awards does. It brings a lot of stakeholders from across the startup ecosystem together. The National Startup Awards 2022 are currently out for applications, so please fill in your applications by tomorrow midnight. You will have a great opportunity to not only interact with different startup founders but also get the support necessary to make your startup into a big ecosystem player, the kind that we have seen Falgun build with his co-founders with upgrad, and hopefully change a lot more lives in the process. Thank you so much, Falgun, for having us. We'll just be ending this podcast now. Thank you everyone for
Thank
coming.
you. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Yeah.